Evening. I just want to say I have been to a lot of conferences and events, and I've never been to one that started with a little mini concert. And every single business event should start with a band like the River Arkansas. That was a great way to start. It doesn't matter what happens after them. This event is a success. A few years ago, my family and I piled into the minivan and drove from Philadelphia to Miami. We lived in Philadelphia then. I grew up in Miami. We usually go home to visit my parents at Christmas time to see them and let them see their grandchildren. And sometimes we drive. This time we drove. It's about 18 hours. So by the time we arrived and checked into our hotel, we were a little worn out. And on the dresser in the hotel was a beautiful, sparkling, square Fiji water bottle, just like this, with this hang tag around its neck. The tag says, "This bottle of Fiji water is here for your drinking pleasure. If you drink it, $7 will be added to your hotel room bill." Now, I am married to a wonderful woman who's also a brilliant journalist, but she does believe that the Fiji water is in the hotel room for her drinking pleasure, as opposed to, for instance, the profit pleasure of the hotel. And so before the hotel room door had even swung shut, she had the bottle of Fiji water open and half consumed. And I did not say anything to my wife about the $7. A single bottle of water that costs more than a good six-pack of beer. An hour ago, who thinks this water comes to America from Fiji, as opposed to, say, from the water treatment plant here in Colorado Springs? Who thinks the water in the bottle is from Fiji? Good Lord. They haven't done a very good job. Okay, I threw the empty Fiji water bottle in my suitcase because I didn't want to forget about Fiji water, and I took it home. And when I got to my desk, I did a little reporting, and I discovered two things. First, the water in every single Fiji water bottle in America comes from Fiji. It is bottled in Fiji and shipped in shrink-wrap packages in those big shipping containers to the United States. It's also, by the way, available in London and Paris. And the second thing is that at that moment in time, 5 or 6 years ago, 53% of the people in Fiji did not have access to clean, safe drinking water. As an American, you could walk into a Walgreens or a 7-Eleven, which is where I went today, or a Walmart or a Whole Foods or a Safeway, and you had easier access to clean, safe drinking water from Fiji. If you lived in Dallas or Atlanta or Baltimore or Chicago, you had easier access to clean, safe drinking water from Fiji than the people in Fiji did. The global economy had contrived to provide Americans with a product they absolutely do not need. My wife likes Fiji water, but she doesn't need it, while denying that very same essential product to the people in the country from which it comes. Well, I'm a reporter. That sounded like an interesting story. I did what any courageous reporter would do. I made the sacrifice of spending a week in Fiji. It's tough, but somebody's got to do it. And I wrote a magazine story about the American obsession with bottled water. I also went to San Pellegrino, Italy, to see where the famous sparkling water in the green bottle comes from. If you want another bit of water trivia, the glass bottle weighs more than the water on the way over here from Italy. And I went on from writing a magazine story about our obsession with bottled water to writing a book called The Big Thirst about our relationship to water and what's happening between humanity and water, something you all can relate to out here in the West. And so asking that one simple, almost ridiculous question, no one in the room actually believes the water is from Fiji. I went to Fiji. I saw the factory. It comes from Fiji. I'm here to tell you. Asking that one simple question that day in that hotel, does the water in that bottle really come from Fiji, changed the whole course of my work life, my personal life. It actually changed the course of my life completely for the last 6 or 7 years. I'm a reporter, So it's my job to be curious. I am a professional asker of questions. But I think of myself as specializing in particular in asking silly questions, obvious questions, even sometimes stupid questions. Because I've discovered two things. First of all, people often don't ask the silly or obvious question because they think they should know the answer, even reporters. And so that question doesn't get asked. And you're as likely to get something important or revealing or surprising by asking the silly question, does the water come from Fiji, as by asking any other question. And so I always make sure to ask the silly or obvious question. Let me give you another example. I was 6 months into reporting my book about water, and I was talking to a nephrologist from Johns Hopkins University Medical School on the telephone. I had somehow developed the idea that it would be great to illustrate how important water is to human beings by learning what happens when we get more and more and more dehydrated, what happens to each of the parts of our body as they get less and less water. And so I was talking to this nephrologist about what it's like to be dehydrated. And he turned out not to be that interesting, and the topic turned out not to be that interesting. And so although I was asking him questions and writing down what he was saying, my mind was wandering a little bit. And I suddenly had an image in my mind of Niagara Falls. And I thought to myself, I have no idea where the water in Niagara Falls comes from. Not from the Niagara River. I know Niagara Falls is the Niagara River going over a cliff, and the Niagara River comes from Lake Erie. But where did the water come from in the first place? How did the water get here on Earth? I was so embarrassed at my ignorance of this seemingly obvious question that I literally remember sitting in my office with the nephrologist kind of droning in my ear, blushing at my own ignorance. And that was great motivation to graciously but quickly get off the phone with the nephrologist. And I spent the next 2 weeks talking to scientists to understand the answer to the question, how did the water get to Earth? How did the water that's in Niagara Falls actually get here? And it's a great story. There is no mechanism for creating huge quantities of water on Earth. All the water we've got is all the water we've ever had. Every drop of water on Earth was created out in space, hydrogens and oxygens slamming into each other in huge clouds of misty molecules. And that water was delivered to Earth not long after the planet was formed. All the water on Earth is 1.3 or 1.4 billion years old, its original equipment. And that tells you two things. First of all the water on Earth is cosmic rain. It literally came from space in exactly the condition it's in. And the second thing is, all the water on Earth has been recycled millions and millions and millions of times. It is all literally Tyrannosaurus rex pee. It's all been through the kidneys of a Tyrannosaurus rex many, many, many times. So asking that question, where did the water on Earth come from, changed completely not only how I thought about water and understood it, but also how I wrote about it. I decided that I was underestimating water's personality, water's pedigree, and I decided to make water a character in my water book because I wanted to capture that sense of wonder. And so, again, asking a really simple question, like, didn't we learn where water came from in the 3rd grade with that funny diagram of the water going up over here? Apparently we didn't, it turns out. It's a better story. Asking that simple question changed, again, the way I thought about my work life. It also changed, again, the way I thought about Fiji water, because it does come from Fiji, but no matter what the people in Fiji say, it too is Tyrannosaurus rex pee. I'm going to knock myself off the air here. Every question is an adventure, or as the nephrologist reminds us, every question is a potential adventure. You never know how the dots are going to connect. I'm not just a fan of the simple question. I actually spent 2 years reporting about curiosity itself. 2 years asking questions about asking questions in order to co-author a book about curiosity with the great Hollywood producer Brian Grazer. Now, you may or may not know Brian Grazer's name, but you certainly know his work. He's the man who gave us A Beautiful Mind, Apollo 13, Arrested Development, the TV show, Friday Night Lights, the movie, Friday Night Lights, the TV show, the Da Vinci Code. He's got a great movie in the multiplex right now with Tom Cruise called American Made. And Brian and I teamed up to write this book about curiosity called The Curious Mind. And one thing we very quickly realized is that curiosity is not a single quality. It is not a single characteristic. There's a spectrum of curiosity. Curiosity comes in different flavors and wavelengths and intensities. There are different kinds of curiosity because we use curiosity in different ways every day. Curiosity is the spark that starts a romantic flirtation. Curiosity is what turns mischievous teenage boys and girls into engineers or investigative reporters. Curiosity motivates a brilliant, impatient homicide detective to chase every last clue in the murder he's trying to solve. And curiosity motivates the patient, meticulous physician trying to connect symptoms that seem unrelated in a really sick patient. In the end, Brian and I sort of cataloged about 15 different kinds and uses of curiosity. The most surprising one was kind of a delightful one, was the power of curiosity to make you a better boss. It turns out that asking questions, even really simple questions, can often be a more powerful management tool than giving instructions or even giving orders. Let me tell you a story. I was sitting in Brian's Hollywood producer office, which is, of course, in Beverly Hills. Brian was on his couch. He spends 11 hours a day sitting on a couch. That's what great movie producers do. He was talking to his senior executive in charge of movie production about a movie that wasn't getting made. It's a Christmas movie. At the point I was listening to them talk, it was one Christmas late. It was clearly going to be at least another whole Christmas late, and as it turns out, it was 2 more Christmases late. I'm not allowed to tell you the name of the movie, but it starred Diane Keaton, and it came out a couple Christmases ago. Brian was just learning why the movie was, as they say in Hollywood, in the ditch, why it wasn't getting made, what it was going to take to get it out of the ditch, and what it was costing while it was in the ditch. And at one point, he interrupted his vice president, and he said to her, "Why are we making this movie?" And she immediately recounted for him the story of how the deal had come to them and why they were excited about it and, what they thought the potential was years before. He wasn't asking, why are we making this movie? He was asking, why are we making this movie? And he let her finish, and then he looked at her and he kind of cocked his head to one side and he said, "Do you love this movie?" And she stopped and she looked at him and she kind of gave him a half smile. And then she sidestepped the question and continued the conversation. But Brian had made his point. At this point in the life of Brian Grazer's movie company, he's partnered with Ron Howard, a name you may well know. They only want to make movies and TV shows that they love. But if you say to somebody, let's only make movies and TV shows we love, well, that sentence, let's make movies we love, is just a workplace platitude. You brush that aside and keep going. Do you love this movie is a sentence, is a question, 5 words, packed with information and values. It does the opposite of the other sentence. It brings the conversation to a pause. It creates a space, a really simple question, a basic question that creates a space to learn something you weren't expecting. To learn something you weren't expecting if you're the person asking the question, but even more important, it creates the space to learn something you weren't expecting if you're the person answering the question. I believe in the power of the silly question so much that I actually have one I ask at the end of every interview for every story I do. Whether I've talked to somebody for 30 minutes or 3 hours or followed them around for 3 days, I always finish every interview with one question, and that question is there anything I haven't asked you that you think I should know? Here's what's amazing about that question. Half the time, that question gets me the best story, the best insight, the best little tidbit, what becomes the lead or the end of the story. Here's how it works. I was in Oak Ridge, Tennessee, writing a profile of a woman, a scientist there, whose job was to make research mice for other scientists, Barbara. So If you needed mice that had high blood pressure, Barbara could genetically engineer you mice with high blood pressure. If you needed mice resistant to diabetes, Barbara could make you mice that were resistant to diabetes. Barbara works in a 5-story building, 5-story red brick building called the Mouse House. It contains 36,000 mice. So I did follow Barbara around for 3 days, and we were kind of having a thank you, finish, farewell lunch at Ruby Tuesday in Oak Ridge, Tennessee. And my notebook was on the table, but it was closed. And I said to Barbara, is there anything I haven't asked you about what you do, about making these research mice, that you think I should know? Anything I haven't been smart enough to ask in the last couple of days that you think it would be good for me to know? And Barbara laughed and said, oh my gosh, you followed me around for 3 days. You've asked every question I can imagine asking about my job and 100 questions I never would have even thought of. No, you could almost do my job at this point. And then she gazed off for a minute. She put down her iced tea. And she said, well, maybe there's one thing. I don't know whether you're going to want to know or not. Maybe there's one thing you'd like to know. I'm allergic to mice. I was like, what? With anybody else, you would have thought it was a joke. Barbara is the kind of scientist, there weren't jokes like that. I said, oh my gosh, Barbara, yes, I'm very interested to know that you're allergic to mice. You open the door of the Mouse House, the sealed door, and you step across that threshold, you know you're walking into a building that contains 36,000 mice. Barbara went on to tell me, what she had to do to enable her to work with the mice in the Mouse House, shots, medicine. I said, my goodness, why? She said, it doesn't matter. I care so much about the work. I like the people I work with so much. I really love doing this. The allergy isn't a big deal. That's why it didn't even occur to me to tell you. It's not on my mind. Was I happy that I knew when I sat down to write that story that the woman who custom designs mice is allergic to the custom designed mice? You bet I was. We're going to hear from a whole run of really brilliant people this evening who are going to, I think, change how all of us think about curiosity, and I'm really looking forward to that myself. What I hope you'll take from me is, I hope that you'll be a little curious about the magic of the simple question, the obvious question. We learn to stop listening to that question in the 4th or 5th grade. I hope you'll pay a little more attention to the obvious question and test it out, see if it helps you. Is the water in the Fiji water bottle from Fiji? Where did the water in Niagara Falls come from? Do you love this movie? And I hope you'll test my all-purpose question too. Whether you're interviewing a job candidate or you're talking to your doctor about your first colonoscopy, is there anything I haven't asked you about this that you think I should know? The answers may change your life or at least get you a trip to Fiji. Thank you all so much for having me.